Welcome to the Mobile Games Playbook in association with Liftoff. Join us as we uncover the latest trends in user acquisition, monetization, and mobile game design.
Hello, and welcome to the Mobile Games Playbook. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. This is the podcast all about what it takes to make a great mobile game, what is and isn't working for mobile game designers, and all of the latest trends. I'm your host, John Jordan, and today is definitely all about the latest trends. So we are, I think as a podcast host, you love all your podcasts, but I think the end of year roundup podcast is always the host's favourite one, and that's what we're doing today. So we're really going to delve across the past 12 months, and we will do that with our two experts, of course. Glad to welcome them back, familiar faces to us, familiar voices as well. So we have Erno Kiiski, Chief Game Analyst at Liftoff. How's it going, Erno?
It's going great. How are you, John?
Yeah, good. And Teemu Palomaki, Chief Game Analyst at Liftoff. How's it going, Teemu?
Going great.
Good. So you have really done your homework today, and you are going to really take us through all the action that's been happening, and we are basically breaking the podcast down. You're going to be talking about some sort of big releases, and then you're going to be talking a bit about some features as well. So we're going to kick off with the sort of the big releases of the year, and within that you have encapsulated a very cool trend. So Erno, you going to take us away?
Yeah, sure. So of course, a lot of releases. So, we could spend hours and hours on talking about here, but we tried to narrow it down to more specific and more kind of like a general idea what makes these games interesting in terms of a grand scheme of things, what is happening in the market. So I think one probably with the most releases and kind of most action happening, probably actually last year was the Forex genre and the Forex strategy genre, and kind of how that genre has been evolving in the past. It has been evolving already for a couple of years, definitely, but I think this year was the one when we saw a surprisingly big amount of games scaling to the top of that subgenre. And also the interesting notion here is that pretty much everybody who went and was able to scale there used the same kind of tactics. So what is the tactic? So basically, of course, as we know, the current market situation, what's it been for years and so on, and the difficulty of scaling and, UA for the whale based, finding your whales for your Forex strategy games, which is, of course, the very different markets landscape what it was years ago, and so on and so on. So the trend of making the Forex strategy out of that niche, out of that small niche, trying to casualize it, trying to find a wider audience. And this year we definitely saw multiple examples and very successful examples of that. And especially if you go even deeper, how these games have been casualizing the experience, it's been through these minigame layers. And the minigame layers, it's not a new thing itself. If we think about the Forex strategy and games like Ebony, which is age-old game, and they did it already years ago, did the whole pull the pin ads and then adding it on especially the first time user experience and the early player funnel, but then it's basically forgotten about. But what is new about this new generation of this kind of a casualized Forex strategy games, it's that actually these casual hooks and the gameplay, it's much more thought part of the whole experience, and it's much more intertwined into the whole experience. Of course, the emphasis is still that, okay, that's what they push to, with their UA, with their creatives, and definitely it has a bigger emphasis on the early player experience, and then the more kind of a deeper Forex mechanics and gameplay is introduced gradually. But still, those are not just mini games that you just play separately and then you kind of forget about it. But it actually is intertwined into the whole gameplay loop, and it's part of the gameplay loop for a longer period of time than just the beginning. So some games to highlight from this year, of course, Whiteout Survival, that was the big game last year. That game last year scaled to the very top, is still in the very top. What they did was, of course, they had the survival element into the gameplay. This kind of you have your base and you need to, make sure that people survive and all that stuff. And then have that forex strategy conquering aspects coming into the play. I'm sure many of these games that came this year saw the success of Whiteout Survival, and especially in terms of the names, because for example the two names that comes to my mind, and if we look at the top charts and with games that scaled the most, first of all definitely the Last War Survival. Very similar name, survival in the name. But to be honest, if we think about the gameplay hook and the creatives, what they did, it was quite different angle than what Whiteout Survival did. So Last War Survival, they used this like hyper casual gate mini games that we have seen. Anybody who has used any apps probably have seen these ads. So you have these gates, and then there's like multipliers and sums and so on, and you need to move the character and go to the right gate and so on and so on. So hyper casuals have been using it for a long period of time. But Last War Survival, actually, yes, they have this like very shallow mini game in there as well, but it's also part of the game as one of their key PvP modes and like arena modes. That's actually you are moving the character. You have this kind of like a similar gate element into the gameplay, and then the more further you go into the game, more forex elements are introduced. It has a very casual team, very cartoonish team, and that game pretty much it launched right at the start of the year. I think it was like last days of December or something like that. So right on the end of last year, but it has been scaling pretty much throughout the year, and it's now, especially in the US, it's the top forex game that is out there. It's like Top Crossing 4 game or Top Crossing 5 and hovering around there in the whole market. So insane scaling, insane success story in terms of like this casualization of a forex strategy game. And to continue from there, game called Dark War Survival, again a survival game. This is actually a game from the same company with Last War, and this game just launched in September, so it's relatively new, but it's been scaling ever since. And again, same strategy, same game plan, that okay, we have a forex strategy game, okay, how we make it more approachable, what kind of a gameplay layer we can add to it. This time, this is actually much more closer what Whiteout Survival did back in the day, but now the setting is more like zombie apocalypse or like this type of apocalypse survival aspect. And that game, again, has been scaling like crazy. So that company at least have found immense success with this strategy. And then the third one that I want to highlight on this same strategy pattern, it's coming from a different company, but all of these are from Chinese companies. But the third one is different from Last War and Dark War. So it's a game called Top Heroes. And to me, it's the most interesting and most differentiating from all of these, because actually this game, what is the casual layer on this game? It's actually this almost like idle arcade that you have seen in hybrid casual type of games, that you move character and this like very light action RPG, like hybrid casual game like Dreamdale from Say Games. It's a bit similar what Top Heroes has, and that's one of the core layers of the game. It starts with that layer. Yes, forex comes to start in the play for later on, but then that gameplay hook and gameplay part of the gameplay loop, it doesn't go away at any point. And same for all of these game 3 games that I mentioned. Yes, their emphasis changes maybe a little bit when the forex becomes a much bigger part of it towards the end game, but it's not anymore that okay, we just make a mini game, slap it on top, and then you play 10 levels and then you forget about it, and then you get stuck with the actual forex, and then people churn because it's not the game that they thought. But it's actually much more sophisticated approach and much more part of the initial design process. And this has been the way that the forex have found totally like a new dawn, so to speak. Many new games scaling and finding success with this kind of like approach.
It's a very good point, because forex, I guess, has always been one of the best sort of monetized sort of genres or subgenres in mobile, back in the days of sort of 2015, and actually it's interesting that 4X games have tended, because they've been so sort of hardcore, they've also tended to be very sophisticated in terms of their UA. So obviously, Machine Zone back in the sort of the glory days was spending the most amount of money on UA and had the best sort of UA funnel and inflow. But obviously, there's only a certain amount of people who are going to play those games. I'm sure we've all played those sort of Mobile Strike, and you go in, and it's like within 2 minutes, just like, whoa, what's going on here? So the problem was just everyone dropped off straight away. So what you're saying is really making sense, that the 4X people are basically building their sort of UA funnel from the ads into the game, and that's going sort of deeper into the game. Obviously, at some point, you need to get those people to be in the 4X thing, which is the really deep monetized aspect of it. But what you're doing, from what it seems like, this sort of casualization you're saying of the sort of earlier stages, it's just getting people engaged in the game, and then you can get them into the sort of deeper parts, which is sort of really where you want them. But it's you're really focusing that sort of mixing up UA and game.
Definitely, and exactly that. Like these mini games and this type of we have seen it in 4X for a long period of time, but now the past 2 years it's been much more sophisticated, and it also a part of the retention and engagement for the games, because I don't see like Ebony back in the day pull the pin. It's not the one that keeps builds up retention in that game. It's just a hook to get the player in, and then if you're lucky, some of them stick, and then but so much more lower CPIs that they get from there. Then in the end of back in the day, it was enough to get like the equation was positive. But now with this one, it's much more bigger part of the game, which is like the interesting shift that I see also in this kind of like a mini game / casual gameplay layer kind of like a element in this genre.
4X is not the only genre that has been doing casualization. So who else has been picking up on these ideas?
Well, I'd say Pokemon is one that comes to mind in the card battler. I think everyone has heard of the Pokemon TCG Pocket right now. It's doing quite well. I look a lot on the Japanese market, and it's spectacular there. It's flatlining that top spot. Last month there were only 3 dips to second place in either downloads or crossing. So it's really dominating there, and it's interesting how it's a card battler, sure, but more than that, it's kind of a card collector. I don't know, Erno, did you play a lot of Pokemon card games with your friends when you were younger?
No, to be honest, that's actually the thing that I feel that they really cleverly tap into. But at least, back in the day when I was we collected the cards, but we actually never even played with them. It was all about the collection. So they are definitely also that's the angle that they go for, and has been going for successfully, at least the first month. So
for me, I was lucky. My younger brother was close enough in age that when we collected those cards, we could play them. But for many people, it was just a collecting aspect, and that's kind of what the TCG Pocket really excels in. So if you think about the Pokemon brand, it has these 2 major phrases that everyone likes to repeat. There's the "gotta catch 'em all," and then there's "I want to be the very best." And this time, in the TCG Pocket, they're focusing on the "gotta catch 'em all." I want to collect them all. And that seems to be the winning strategy for Pokemon when they're going on mobile. If you think about Pokemon Go, it's all about collecting. Sure, there are the battles, but that's not as engaging maybe as the collecting aspects. That collecting is what you do most of the time. Here in the Pocket, you're opening the packs. You come daily to open the packs, and it feels really good to collect the cards. That's where the emphasis is. Sure, you can play with them in simplified matches. Those are casualized, but the focus is on the gotta catch them all. Same with in Japan, Pokemon Sleep is doing really well. There not much you do in terms of core except sleep, but you collect the Pokemons there. If we think about the battling Pokemon games, we have Pokemon Unite, Pokemon Masters X, maybe Quest, and then there was earlier release, I think 2 years ago, Pokemon TCG Live, which was more focused on the battling aspect, with like the standard decks, the 60 card decks versus what we have in TCG Pocket, 20 card decks, really simplified, easy to access. The battling ones are not doing that well. The battles are fun in Pokemon, but I think if we think about collecting something versus the kind of battling, collecting kind of never gets old. It gets maybe even more engaging when the more you do it, because you're getting closer to completion. Whereas with battling, it becomes repetitive and like, sure, you add more challenge, but that makes it even more tedious. You need to think harder, and so the success and that we can see in Pokemon games comes through the collection aspect, and that's really interesting how they kind of casualized that and focused on the collecting.
I guess also, if you're battling, then you're sort of showing expertise of what's going on, but then you need to put a lot of time into it. Whereas, how, you know, as you say, people now in their middle, maybe not middle age, but people now who have sort of grown up and in professional life, grew up with Pokemon, and you haven't got time to probably do the battling. But like, to collect digitally the sort of, you know, cards you had in your youth and some new ones, that's sort of actually, so it plays well to a much sort of older audience. So it's sort of the you know, it sort of plays to that sort of legacy that Pokemon has.
And there's also like a lot of similarities to Marvel Snap's launch in terms of like, again, like Marvel Snap is much more focused, of course, on the actual battles, but what they did also made it so much more easy to approach, because the biggest problem with CCGs for years has been that, you know, you start playing Magic now and that entry barrier is so goddamn high, or even like Hearthstone, which already made it like a bit more casual than Magic, but like even that, I remember when I jumped into it some years ago, I was like, like so many cards to figure out and learn, and you know, there's so much to like learn to get into the game, when these type of games make the whole genre so much more approachable. And then the three, maybe the biggest question, at least for me, the Pokemon TCG Pocket, is like the sustainability in terms of, yes, they're gonna bring new stuff to collect and so on, but will it be able to sustain and engage players in the long run, or like what is their plan for the long-term engagement? That is still a bit question, because it's still very early, but like at least the launch super strong.
Do we have some other genres?
One that I would like to maybe talk about, again, if we keep on the topic of casualization in terms of midcore genres, just recently a new hobby game, Capybara Go, released in global. It already had been in the markets, in the Asian markets for a while, and doing very well there. And it just launched in the Western markets globally, in the US. It is scaling at the moment, maybe not as explosive launch that maybe some people expected, but of course it's you know, more towards the hybrid casual games that, you know, scale over time a little bit more than necessarily like Pokemon TCG, that, you know, you can buy the decks as much as you want in the beginning, and then, you know, it jumps to the top of the charts right away. In terms of revenues, but will be interesting to see. But they released a game called Capybara Go, and the twist here is that actually it uses the same patterns, same proven meta gameplay mechanics that we have seen every single hobby game. So it's already this template that they have. So they have this meta framework, this like light RPG meta framework, which then they slap on top different core gameplays and try to make it work pretty much. That's the hobby strategy and the model. But the most interesting part about this new one, the Capybara Go, is that, because if you think about hobby games, Archero, Survivor.io, all of these games, they are very skill and very like reaction-based skill games in terms of their core gameplay. But this new one, the Capybara Go, it's actually doesn't have skill at all. It's more this like, you go on a journey and there's like little narrative bits, and then you make these roguelike choices like all the hobby games, but there's not really this like reaction-based gameplay at all. So what then that does, of course, if we think about that, then it might be able to appeal to maybe a little bit more wider audience compared to Survivor.io or Archero, because it's more like, okay, we think about the biggest games in the market now, like Monopoly Go. There's zero skill involved. It's just basically pushing a button and seeing the numbers go up. So that's why we kind of even talked about this game. It's kind of like a social casino RPG in that way, that it's basically this game's core gameplay is pushing a button, seeing things happen. Yes, here is a little bit of strategy in terms of you choose the skills like in any roguelike game, but there's not that reaction-based gameplay at all, which has been part of all the before Happy games. So it might be able to open up to more wider audience than other Happy games have been, which remains to be still seen, but that's definitely the interesting angle that they are going now with this new one.
And we have a final genre we're going to discuss.
We could be brief about this one, but sort of the gender demographics. I think we've seen Love and Deep Space, for example, kind of interactive story, sure, but it has that RPG layer, which generally is kind of aimed for men, but that is kind of doing really well, really exceptional performance, and that the dating aspect there, definitely aimed for women, but there's a little bit of that crossing the traditional gender demographics. Same with, in match 3 space, we've seen before, Chrome Valley Customs kind of match 3 for men, but then Truckstar this year doing really well, kind of targeting that male audience in the match 3 space, which generally has been thought of as sort of women's area more than men's area. So really interesting seeing that aspect also.
Definitely, and especially on the Truckstar, it's an interesting one, because if you look at the game, it's very similar to Crow Valley Customs, and the same, again, playbook, that, okay, they want to expand the match 3 audience. But the game is coming from actually the company who made Whiteout Survival, so Century Games, so totally different genre. But something that we can see is the amount of resources that the company has, because if we compare it to Crow Valley Customs, Truckstar in its live ops framework, it's pretty much competing against the very, very top, like your Royal Matches and your Play Rigs games and so on. Already, even though it launched start of the year, it has been scaling their live ops like crazy. And that's in a totally another level that Crow Valley Customs is, which has been a little bit on a decline. So the amount of resources that they have been able to push that game, and it's been on a scaling ever since the launch. So remains to be seen. Will it be able to sustain better than Crow Valley Customs? I have a much more because of the live event framework, which I always felt was a little bit lacking in Crow Valley Customs compared to what the market is nowadays in that genre, which needs so much live ops. That's the standard, but Truckstar is definitely being able to kind of tap into that. But I guess overall the whole this game, and then the Love and Deep Space game, which is interactive story plus RPG, this is we talked a lot about casualization of the midcore genres, and this is more expanded the gender demographics from the usual genre archetype. So it's kind of a little bit on the different side. So you have these casual-ish genres like interactive story, mainly female-driven audiences, usually super feature light. And now this new game comes in, attaches a little bit of RPG elements there, increases the possible LTVs crazy, and then it's been doing super well also in the West. And that's the surprising thing, because in the Asian markets, we have seen these type of games like Love and Deep Space before, but they never really do well in the West. But this is doing really, really surprisingly well in the West as well. So, and it's a game that I feel that not that much are talked about in the industry, at least in the Western industry. Even though if you go and look at the charts of that game, it's doing crazy well. So definitely, at least in terms of like, if you haven't heard, or like it's my pick to check in terms of like something totally that usually didn't work at all in the Western markets.
One of the takeaways from the podcast is go and download Love and Deep Space and check it out. Good. Okay, so we've been talking about sort of casualization of sort of more core genres. So what's been happening in sort of the more casual space? What have they been up to?
Well, one thing of the past year, definitely, hybrid casual, it's the term talked about so much in the industry nowadays, and we talked about kind of like the casualization, and it's kind of like a hybrid element there as well. But of course, if we talk about hybrid casual, it's more like, you know, moving from hyper casual ad monetized games to games to have a little bit more long-term engagement and the IAP monetization. And traditionally, usually these games, hybrid casual games, like the origin, like Archero, of course, back in the day, and these type of games, usually the genres that they have been in have been mainly these like add some kind of like a power progression and so on, and that's the way that they can add engagement, add long-term engagement, add IAP monetization. But in the past year, we have definitely seen a lot of movement towards hybrid casual puzzle games, actually. And what these are, so three games, for example, that are nowadays close to like top 100 grossing apps in IAP revenue only in the Western markets, like Hexasort, crazy scaling of this year, Screwjam, coming from Rollic, scaling like crazy, Twisted Tangle, another Rollic game, and overall, like Rollic has been Rollic has scaled multiple of these games in the past year. And if we then little bit zoom out and think about like what is in common with these games, pretty much they use the best practices from, you know, the IAP driven casual puzzle games like match 3 games in terms of like, you know, live events. And then they add those on top of the different core gameplay, different kind of a puzzle experiences. And that's the kind of like a way that these puzzle games have been able to add IAP monetization. So they used to be just like, okay, it's a hyper casual puzzle game, just add monetization. But now it's kind of like a live ops machine, like almost, you know, the line between what is a casual puzzle game and what is a hybrid casual puzzle game, it has, you know, dimmed. They are almost the same. But if you think about it, basically it is all of these three, for example, the games that I mentioned, all of them have a different new type of a core gameplay compared to what we see in the IAP, where we have seen like thousands of match 3 games. But all of these, like Hexasort has this kind of like you make these piles of like, I don't know, how do you call them, like slides, or it's a very interesting core gameplay concept. Then Screwjam, it's this like, okay, you need to remove the screws. Twisted Tangle is that you have these ropes that you need to like solve, or like the tangles that you need to solve and figure out those puzzles like that. And all of these games, in the grand scheme of things, use the same kind of like basic monetization of puzzle games. You know, you buy extra moves, or if it's a time-based, you buy extra time to complete the level, and so on and so on. Then you have the boosters and stuff like that. But how these, if we look at on the production side, of course they are adding levels, but the another thing that I mentioned that they have been scaling is taking the best practices of live events, the live ops that we have seen in the top performing puzzle games. So different kind of competition events, different kind of collection events, different type of loss aversion based win streak events, all that stuff. And they have been scaling like this. And then as we talked about having the RPG type of a template, then we see these companies applying this kind of like a same mentality, but on the puzzle side. So for example, Rollic, like I mentioned, they have multiple different type of a hybrid casual puzzle games, all with different type of a core gameplay loop. So they're testing out, of course, what works in terms of marketing, what works in terms of engagement, and then they start to build on top of that. And how they build it, it's pretty much the same formula that they do with all of them. So they have that kind of like a template that, okay, then we add these events and these events and these events, and they have this kind of like a template that they scale all of these puzzle games. And that's been one big shift in the puzzle market in the past year, that I feel that this type of a hybrid, new type of a core gameplay plus with a little bit of an ad monetization intertwined, this has been scaling in the past year.
Just to point out, for people who don't know, Rollic is part of Zynga, which is obviously part of Take-Two, so they have a sort of a big professional organisation behind them, so they're not sort of one of these sort of small startups messing around. They're part of a big serious business. Anything else we want to talk about from the older games, or should we move on?
I can briefly mention, because it's been a big story this year. Brawl Stars doing really well. At the start of the year, they were already kind of scaling up, thanks to maybe the return of the random element in start drops and hypercharge mechanics, sort of end game skills for characters, and battle pass rework. So they had that kind of going on before the year started, but then this year they've reworked their ranked PvP, and then they have really embraced the collaboration events. They had SpongeBob and they had the Godzilla event, which were really well received, and they've also been using these event only boosts and skills for characters. The most recently in Angels and Demons event, so you can get these limited time boosts to your characters, and I think with mobile games, sure, gachas are one big thing why people play those games, the randomness and the excitement that comes from it, but also the progression. So what they have done with the embracing of these limited time event boosts is that you get constant progression. Before it was maybe a little bit more stale. Granted, Supercell has been really good at sort of shuffling the meta a little bit, so the game feels kind of fresh when they adjust the characters, and it kind of lives which characters are the best at what moment. But they've been doing really good, and hats off to them for their performance this year.
I think they had, just because the Angels and Demons event is, I think, still ongoing, but I think they had their all-time high one-day revenue spike just recently. So it's very, very, very impressive, the whole turnaround. Not too many stories of this level of turnaround in terms of a game that has been scaling down, and then through the roof, so to speak.
Yeah, no, it's obviously fellow Finns, so always good to talk about Supercell. But did you say it's an interesting story where they were sort of for so long sort of the number one, certainly in the West, and then it seemed like it was a sort of not quite a terminal decline, but it seemed like sort of you couldn't really see how they were going to sort of turn stuff around. And obviously internally they've had quite a serious sort of a radical reshaping of how they're approaching stuff. So it's sort of good to see that's worked, because they're always very smart in what they were doing. So it's good to say they can the old dog can reinvent itself. And that's a good segue, actually. So we're moving on from sort of specifically talking about sort of games and genres to look at some sort of features that have been happening. So what do you want to sort of highlight there in what we've seen in 2020?
Yeah, of course, here is also many things we could talk about. But we thought about two things that we have wanted to highlight, two kind of maybe topics that we wanted to highlight that have been maybe the most clearest of kind of shifts or trends that we have seen. And one actually kind of links to what Teemu talked about, the Angels and Demons events and having this limited time progression vector for a long a month or so on. Is this kind of an overarching umbrella event trend? It's a funny term, but let me explain it a little. So if we think about mobile games, and most of the mobile games, and there are live events, it's nothing new, and there are tons of events in all kind of games all the time, so on. But previously, not all of the games, at least, of course some has been doing it better than the others, but many times one big problem for these events and this kind of a short-term engagement of you have a 3-day event, you have a 4-day event, and then another comes in, and so on and so on. But there's nothing really interconnecting those. Of course, you get the rewards, you get better in the core gameplay and stuff like that. But there's usually not progression vectors to interconnect these individual events in the event framework. And this is something that we have seen kind of like as a trend across the market. So if we think about first in like casual games, easily the most trendiest way to execute this and do this in the casual market has been these like collectible albums. This is actually something that, for example, slots games have been doing for years, like the casual casino slots games. Basically, you collect some kind of like a stickers or cards or whatever, and usually the way to get these cards is through all these other smaller events. And some of the casual games already also has been doing it for a while. But especially interesting thing is that every game has been moving towards kind of like the seasonal approach. So you have 2 months, 3 months long seasons, and then after the 3 months, the album changes, and then you need to collect the cards again. And this is a feature that has been popping up in multiple games. I think, especially after Monopoly Go launched, and they had this right from the get-go, I feel that in the casual market, so many games have tried to kind of like follow through that kind of like a same approach. If we think about like Royal Match, for example, they used to have this as kind of like a permanent progression vector, but they changed it to a limited time, so now they have seasons there. And then we think about like games like Gossip Harbor. It's one of those Merge 2 games from Microfun. Also games actually that have been scaling like crazy this year. They have added it. And so many more examples that have done it in the past year. So basically, maybe the main kind of like a key takeaway and idea here is this kind of like a feature to build that gives you a connecting like a progression vector for all of your other events. So then it gives this kind of like an extra incentive to, okay, I participate in this event, and then I get a progression in here. And especially in casual games where there necessarily isn't that power progression or isn't those other kind of like a progression vectors than just going forward in the game and going forward in the meta renovations or whatever. But this kind of like another progression vector, which then also many of these games intertwine like social elements. You can like send cards to another and trade cards with each other, so it creates this community. For example, Monopoly Go has been very, very active on pushing players to kind of like, okay, hey, send these to your friends and join these communities to talk about like which cards you need and so on. So there's that aspect as well. And then also in the midcore, maybe a little bit different approaches, not so much this kind of like a collectible album, which has been kind of like almost as a standard in the casual market. But in midcore, games like Clash Royale, already, I think it was last year already, but they changed their event format to season-based, that all the events like over the course of the season, you earn this event currency, which then you are using on the season shop. So again, like, yes, you can be interested in one individual event, but now all the events are somehow interconnected. Wild Rift, just recently, the League of Legends Wild Rift, in Netflix they launched the Arcane series, and in Wild Rift they had a massive event where like multiple different pieces and different phases and different types of events, but what connects everything together on that longer event is a overarching currency, for example. Call of Duty Mobile, also another one that has been overhauling this kind of like how we can interconnect individual events, other than, of course, the battle pass is there, but like we have so much more events on top of the battle pass, so how we can make these kind of like a seasonal progression vectors, they have been changing that over the year. And then that kind of like a trend is definitely one, if we think about like event trends that we have seen becoming more and more popular in the market.
I guess the event one's sort of interesting because it's adding sort of that complication, but which will engage some people, but equally for some people maybe it's I'm saying too much about myself. For other people, sort of, if you're sort of a lighter user, you sort of get the current, because the way it's a new currency and you sort of maybe come into it a bit late or something. It's sort of like it acts as sort of like, oh, I'm too late, I can't be bothered with what's this other currency. It becomes quite difficult, I think, when you adding that level of sophistication. stickers sort of make more sense. Yeah, I'm collecting stuff, or that's sort of fun. But the currency stuff, I think, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because I think that's a much harder one to sort of land for your audience.
So yeah, that's definitely been why, for example, the casual audiences and the casual games have been implemented the sticker one, probably because of the more complex mechanics that maybe the casual audiences are not so, even though we cannot underestimate in terms of the casual audiences nowadays anymore, that more and more complex mechanics have been coming there and been received quite well, but overall the currency systems have been mainly towards the mid-core games for sure.
A few more minutes if there's anything else that you want to highlight before we see the year out.
Well, one another highlight maybe that again, maybe leaning towards casual, but it's been such a big trend that we cannot, leave it out not to mention it. Loss aversion based, especially this concern is mainly like level based puzzle games. So puzzle games in casual market that have levels. And if we think about like features nowadays, and the market is kind of mature and it's kind of rare to see actually features that really like explode nowadays anymore, like battle pass back in the day, for example. It's not that common to see something like that, but this year I feel, especially in this genre, we have seen one feature that has been exploding like crazy, and it's this feature. There's not really like a standardized term for it yet, but let's use the name of the originator. So Royal Match, back last year, they implemented this feature called Super Light Ball. So what is a Super Light Ball? Super Light Ball is basically a feature that opens up in about, you have completed 300-ish levels. And how it works is that you need to complete 10 levels. You don't need to complete them in a row, but after you have completed 10 levels, then your light ball, which is, if you have played any of the match 3 games, it's always the one that destroys all the one specific color. So basically the strongest power-up item in those games. That power is doubled. So it gives you a big benefit. But the twist is here that if you lose even one level, you're gonna lose that benefit. So that's where the win streak comes in. So you need to keep on the win streak, or otherwise you're gonna lose the benefit. And if you lose the benefit, then you need to grind again all the 10 levels to get that benefit. So 2 things. So of course there's the grind, the 10 levels. It's not just like you complete one level and you get it again. And the second, it's very powerful, the boost that you get. So it drives this very strong loss aversion. So like, I don't want to lose this. So when Royal Match implemented it, we could see it clearly, especially in puzzle games. It's very rare to see a clear correlation of anything added, because like usually it's more like indirect and slowly scaling and so on. But with this one, we saw quite a clear correlation. Really soon after, Toon Blast from Peak Games, they added the same feature, same thing. And that happened, I think Toon Blast added it in the end of last year, and this year has been the year of the Super Light Ball in the puzzle games, because if we look at the market, nowadays it's already 52% of all the games, all the top puzzle games in the top crossing 200, which of there are like 30-40 almost. So over half of those games have implemented it this year. So this kind of like a one feature that really spreads like wildfire. It's very rare to see nowadays in any genres, but now this year it's been for the puzzle. So definitely one trend highlight for this year to add this. And then if we think about overall, it's not the only this type of this is maybe like the most trendiest and the most where we have seen correlation with the impact. But another kind of like a similar thing that taps into the win streaks and loss aversion in puzzle games are these win streak multipliers. So usually the win streak, how they have been implemented in the past, has been that, okay, you get a booster to start off the next level, and then if you lose, you are not getting a booster, or it's a separate event that you can go thresholds and get rewards and stuff like that. But this year, or actually again end of the last year, this time the trendsetter was Toon Blast. Basically what they did, they add these win streak multipliers into especially competitive events. So basically, if you have a win streak on, you get more event score for that event. So basically what it means that if you want to be competitive, you really need to have the win streak on. So this type of a kind of like a multiplier inside already existing events, it's another trend that we have seen. Basically, the first one that we saw was the Toon Blast in the end of last year, and now again that's like 45%. So almost half of those games have implemented it to some of their events to drive this like loss aversion and then intertwine it with other type of events in there. So that's why maybe those two to highlight of this year, that why like in puzzle games this like renaissance of loss aversion based win streak features and events have been clearly one trend.
As you say, they're sort of interlinked, but it sort of shows how sort of careful you have to be in how you use these things. When you get something like that and it works, it's sort of in the right setting, it can work really well. But loss aversion again is something people generally most people are very loss averse, so they sort of hate going through that sort of process. So again, it could be, imagine if you just place it sort of in the wrong sort of part of your flow in your game, it could be a negative to sort of retention.
Definitely. One thing actually to highlight here, for example, with the super light ball that I talked about, it's not just, okay, hey, this works in another game and I just slap on top of mine, because like actually we have seen in a couple of games, for example, another game from Peak, Toy Blast, a different game, even it has the like same kind of a core and everything. They added that feature. They saw the like initial spike, at least on our data, and then it started to go down, and then they actually experimented. They changed the benefit of that. You know, it used to be the light ball, but now they changed it to the bomb or whatever, the second strongest one. So probably they started to see that, oh shit, this is like too powerful in this game, in like, you know, combination with all the other things, that all the other variables and so on. So definitely something that, you know, it's very specific to your game and all the other mechanics and events and stuff that you have in your game. So also that, and then also in terms of like, because the benefit makes levels easier, so it's also very important to think that you have enough horizontal content there. So like, if, you know, sure, like people are maybe like more incentivized to buy the extra moves to keep the win streak, but if you don't have enough content and people chew through it like instantly because of the easier level balancing, then that's a problem as well. So there are many things to consider other than just like, oh hey, this works in another game and let's slap on top of it.
The conclusion from the podcast days is just how sophisticated these sort of, you know, people think, oh, it's a mobile game, but even the sort of the most sort of seemingly simple hyper casual game is just so much sort of sophistication has gone into how we build the product, how we build the marketing, how the two things connect, and obviously everyone gets data all the time for all their different cohorts, and that's really the sort of the secret sauce now in the industry. Well, thank you, Erno, and thank you, Teemu. That was a really brilliant roundup of everything we have seen in 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, our takeaway is to download Love and Deep Space if you haven't paid that one. So that's your homework. But just to thank Erno and Teemu, and thanks to you guys for watching, listening to our end of year podcast. It's my favourite one, I do have to say, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be subscribed and get all our great episodes, which every time we are looking, you know, deeply into how the mobile game industry is changing. And I guess that's the sort of the really weird thing about it, is it goes further on. There's just more and more sort of sophistication. So we hope we are helping you learn about the industry, and see you next time, next year, in fact. Bye bye.